And Stephen K. Peeples here. We're back with Marty Jourard, and we're going to pick up our conversation talking about the Shock album. And where we left off in the last part, we were talking about working in Giorgio Moroder's studio, the Oasis studio in LA, and taking advantage of all of the various electronic effects that he had available in the studio on the band's fifth album, Shock. Take it away, Marty.
Right. Well, we did Shock in 3 studios. We did some at Conway. And Conway, the engineer there was Mick Gazowski. He ended up working on that Daft Punk record that sold zillions. Him and Will Ferrell, whoever it was. I just remember him as being a very eccentric guy that had this mysterious box that you would plug stuff into and it makes sounds, do some sort of engineering feat that I didn't know what it was. So we worked at Conway. Then we went to Capitol Studio B in December of '84. But we finished up at Oasis, which was Giorgio Moroder's studio in North Hollywood.
Right.
Moroder was just amazing. Donna Summer came in one day and made toast. I watched her make toast in her kitchen. Moroder had a Lamborghini Countach. He'd be talking on the phone to Europe in German. The guy was Italian, German. He knew what time it was. He was just kicking it, you know.
He knew what time it was. I like that.
He knew what time it was. In '85, the beginning of January. Well, January, I say we kept trying to cut the song called "My Love Stops Here," and we just couldn't quite get it right. And I don't know why. There's a sax solo that had about 9 notes, period, and I could not get the feel, and I finally did. So we were doing rough mixes at the beginning of '85 for the Shock album. And then just random note, Tom Petty, I knew Tom Petty from Gainesville where I grew up, and I knew him in LA because he lived about a mile or 2 away, and we both were making records on record labels. So he wanted me to come over and play sax on this song called Mary's New Car. He had just put a studio 24 track in his house in Encino. And it was just a kind of a goofy song about Mary's new car. And he had me come in and play sax. So in February, during these Shock sessions, I went over there and just played sax really goofy, and he seemed to like it. So that was a kick. I got a credit on Southern accents.
How about that?
Yeah. And then in February, we did the album photo session for Shock. We hadn't finished the record, but this guy, Tony Viramontes, he was the art director. And if you see how he did this, we did this for like 6 hours one night. He had an assistant. He had this thing with black and white Polaroid slide film, which they just come out with. It was 35 millimeter film. And what Viramontes did is he took black and white Polaroid 35 millimeter positives that he could develop immediately and look at them. And if he liked one, he'd say, I'm going to use it. And he took pictures of us. I think these were individual. He had us standing on this board. And he hated my hair so much that he had this guy come in and give me this flat top. I call it the helicopter landing pad. I had terrible hair. He gave me this super flat top thing. But what he would then do is take that black and white image and he'd blow it up, enlarge it. And then he'd put this clear plastic on top of that image. And he took metal marking pens, metallic, and he would just mess around with everything. He drew everything. And if he didn't like it, he'd throw away the overlay and try it again. And he did this with every one of us. And he did it on the back cover. We had individual shots. And Janet Jackson saw that art and she immediately hired the guy, and he did the cover to Control.
Right.
Viramontes, who passed away a couple years later, was tremendously talented. So that happened. We did that at the end of February. And then in May and in June, I'm seeing here Oasis, we cut Shame, then we cut Icy Red, then we cut Cries and Whispers. And in July, we did the video for Shame. That was, I don't know who did it, but there was these miniature sets with billboards and, the opening shot is me, a sailor that supposedly slept with Martha, and there's a dead cockroach. The first thing you see in that film is a dead cockroach in the video, and then they zoom back and there's me.
Yeah, yeah. They trying to tell you something, Marty?
just working on my image.
Yeah.
So we finished Shock, and in July, we did that video, and then we went to Australia in August from August 19th to September 2nd, played there for, I think it was the third time we played there. Yeah. Then we came back September 2nd. We had a day off, and then we went on this US tour that went on and on and on. And we were, at one point, we were opening for Rick Springfield, then we were opening for Supertramp. It was a national tour. We went all over the place. And that's the story of making the record and the videos. There's another one also. There's a video for, it was called Shock, the video
Yes,
from Shock.
the title track.
Yeah, and that was a strange video. It was the guy that did that, he had just gotten a Steadicam, and he really wanted to use the Steadicam. They just invented the Steadicam.
Right.
And so he was just running around this house that was for sale. It was all this new development somewhere. It was like a housing development where none of the houses had been sold. So he rented one for a night and just did this crazy thing where Martha's being chased by an unknown assailant. And that was the story of that one. But the Shame video got a lot of airplay on on MTV. That was a beautifully done. I like that one a lot.
Yeah. Well, let's go through the tracks real fast. And Scott Thurston is drumming on this band, on this. Excuse me, he's playing keyboards and guitar on this also. How did you guys work together on that? Did you do anything together, or were all your parts pretty much by yourself?
Oh, well, there was overdubs as usual. Yeah, he did play guitar. I'm not sure what he played. There was a lot of digital drums on this, a lot of drum machine.
Yeah.
And there was some programming where I would actually play it into a sequencer, but when it was recorded, somebody pushed play on the sequencer.
Gotcha.
That at Capitol. Thurston did a lot of keyboards. He had a different keyboard than me. He had an emulator and some other one, and I had a Memory Moog and a DX7. So we had different sounds.
Right.
I can remember what I played on certain things, but there's just a lot of keyboard on this thing, lots and lots, and digital and emulators and samples, and there's this hand clap all over this record. It must have been a sample. You just go boom, boom, lots of hand claps. It's a big hand clap period in the 80s. So the songs, I can go through them one at a time.
Talked a little bit about the title track, but that's one that Martha and Scott wrote. Yeah.
I can't quite figure it's somebody's being pursued and they're flipping out and something's happening. I mean, it's pretty abstract to me. It was very dramatic. We would start the tour with this, and there was this incidental music that Scott came up with that would start out. This is when he had an emulator and a compact, they call it a portable, but it's like the size of a sewing machine. It's this thing that you had to boot up with a green screen, and this is primitive days of that. But we had some sequences going and some music that was being triggered that way. And sometimes when it didn't boot, Martha would have to kill time where we had to reboot this thing. It took 2 minutes to reboot it. But Shock, it's the title track. I can't connect to it particularly emotionally. I didn't have much to do with it. And it's just pretty sad. There's a lot of references to the night in this album. I checked it out. There's 6 out of 10 songs that have the word night or in the title or gone to many times in the lyrics. I'm not going to try to analyze Martha's lyrics, but it was just where we were at that time.
We'll have to ask her about that.
Yeah,
at some point.
Yeah. The next track, Shame. It's about being ashamed of something. I'm sure we all have that. I don't know exactly what it is. There's a lot, these lyrics are all about relationships and love and desires and needs. And it was just, I guess that was going on at the time in our culture and the circles we were going around in the music biz. Hungry.
The push-pull and the tension between all of that makes for great songs. I mean, I can imagine it would be without that creative conflict, that songs would come out that would be anything other than boring.
There's a lot of unspecific relationship stuff going on in these lyrics between men and women or between people. These are very odd times, really, in terms of the 80s, how things had progressed. The recreational drugs had changed in the 80s. The technology had changed. We were deep in the music business at this point. This was our 5th album. So we had been marinated in the Southern California record label, MTV, the whole thing. It was, I guess the word mature, in that sense that this culture that we had been in since 1979, that was a culmination of everything that came before in terms of the technology and the subject matter, the way we were produced. We were of the moment in LA. This was a very current production value.
Yes.
Wasn't outlying. So there was that song. Let's see, where are we at?
Hungry.
Yeah, we're hungry. Yeah, hungry. This is, I don't think Martha I shouldn't think this is her most wonderful song. It's just a song about being hungry and you need somebody. I didn't think I played that much sax on this album until I checked, and I play on 4 songs out of 10. So there's a sax solo on that. It's fairly R&B. I'm playing a lot of R&B. I grew up listening to R&B, rhythm and blues sax, and I think that it's a nice foil for all of these digital keyboard sounds and samples. It brings some warmth, and of course Martha's voice throughout brings warmth because she has a warm voice.
Right.
Now, my 2 favorite tracks, not that you asked, Annie Told Me. Annie Told Me is one, Icy Red is the other. Annie Told Me, Annie Glasscock, that was the drummer Brian's wife, and she seemed to have some sort of, she could imagine things happening, and sometimes they did, and she is prescient about certain things, claims she could see in the future. She wasn't nuts or anything, but she was just a real interesting person. And so Martha wrote this song called Annie Told Me. And it had that drum machine at the beginning. There's a keyboard pattern in the second verse, and it's doing a rhythm, but the person isn't playing that rhythm. They're playing it into a drum machine, and the drum is releasing the sound out in whatever rhythm pattern you programmed. You can hear it.
Right.
It's really hip. Richie had to explain that to me. And I mentioned previously, I cannot take a sax solo on a song I don't like or don't think is good. And I really liked this song, and I really wanted to throw down on the sax solo. And I'm real proud of that sax solo. It's just because it's a release. Everything's digital and everything's drum samples and a lot of layers, and it's deep in the record, but the sax comes along and boom. There's solos that I'm not particularly proud of or don't even know I remembered I played on, but that one, for me, that's probably the coolest thing I did on the whole record, is that sax solo, in my opinion, anyhow.
Yeah,
and the next one was Icy Red, and that was the one that has those voices at the beginning that Moroder had created by having every pitch you can sing by a male, which is 12, and every pitch a female. And we just brought up the chord at the beginning. There's a lick in there when it goes to the double time thing. It's basically cool jerk, da da on the keyboard.
Yeah, right.
And Guy Perry, who I think got a lot of grief in the VH1 Bands Reunited thing, and just within the band sometimes.
Guitar player.
Played the greatest guitar solo, rockabilly guitar solo on Icy Red. Just came out of nowhere.
And he ripped it.
Guitarist technically, but this one, he might as well have been Carl Perkins or something. It's just perfect. You just never know what a person can come up with. It sounds like a backhander. I like Guy, and they tried to create this fake thing between me and him for the Bands Reunited episode, and there was nothing there. They just needed to create some conflict. So,
well, we'll talk about that in another interview.
Yeah. All right, moving along.
Yes.
That was side one,
So,
I think.
Flipping over to side 2, we start off with New York Times.
Yeah, New York Times. Well, Martha wrote this, and we had played Saturday Night Live earlier in the year, so maybe we got a big dose of New York. We weren't just there, but we were really there. And it's about whooping it up in New York.
Yep.
Now,
in the same way in Tokyo, when you were in New York, did you have locals kind of taking you around and showing you the cool places and the cool things to do and stuff that the tourists didn't necessarily do? When in doubt, ask a local, right?
We were pretty much in a hotel and then going to sound check, and we didn't have a lot of time. I do remember going to a Bagel. It's the best bagels I've ever had. And the Carnegie Deli did not have good coffee. I went to a place called Accordion-O-Rama because I had an accordion and I got straps. But yeah, New York Times. I played a tenor sax solo on that, and it was pretty cool. Just kind of straight, maybe like Clarence Clemens, real whack at it. State of the art. That was that had a great bass line by Michael Goodrow. Really cool bass line, and I took a sax solo on that too. That's more R&B. Whatever I bring to the band from what I listened to and where I grew up, which was not where anybody else in the band grew up. Well, when me and Jeff were in the band, both of us were from Florida in the South. So I wasn't thinking of playing in a style, but that was my style. And it seemed to be a good foil for a release in a lot of these songs because everything else was electronic.
Yeah.
Besides Martha's voice. My Love Stops Here was probably the strangest song. Just real creepy. It just kind of reminds me of being in a really cold room because these studios were cold, and we usually would go to the studio at 8 at night and leave at 6 in the morning. It was the craziest schedule. So I'd be sleeping under the board and they'd wake me up. It's time to play a sax solo, and it's not really ideal ways to do it, but that's what we did in 1986, 85. I mean, and I added this. I had a memory moog that had a string pizzicato, a pluck, boom, 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 boom. So I've added that and some keyboard stuff at the intro part.
And now Michael had a hand in writing that too, right? You and Michael are co-credited with Martha on that one.
That's right. Let's see, where are we? My Love Stops Here. Goodrow. Oh, I am too. Hey, I guess I got credit for my keyboard parts.
Hey, mailbox money out of the blue, right?
Well, I didn't get much money from this record, but we can talk about recouping one day.
Yeah, that's another movie. Yeah.
But Martha was generous because she writes most of the songs. If we came up with a cool part, I wouldn't say the song pivoted around that part, but she would give us a percentage of it. So we're on that too. My Love Stops Here. That was the one where I had the hardest time getting that sax solo. I must have cut it 7 times. I just felt like a moron, but we were under interesting situations making these records, showing up at 8 at night. And I don't know who came up with that concept that you show up at 8 and then you stick around if they're doing a guitar solo, even though you may not have your part until the next day at 3 in the morning. Say, why we were up at 3 in the morning? Well, this was LA in the 80s. And it looks so stupid now, but we did finish the record and we made it.
Well, we got two more tracks. Cries and Whispers. Who's David Sigerson?
David Sigerson was a producer and a songwriter, and I think he became a novelist. David then ended up I might not have this right, but he became vice president of Polydor or something. He was a big deal. He's an all-around guy. And later, there was a movie called Soul Man with C. Thomas Howell pretending to be black. That would never make it. That would never be green lighted today, but it was then. And there was a song in there that David wanted Martha Davis to sing with Sly Stone. And it was Love and Affection by Joan Armatrading. And David arranged all the music and recorded it, except for the sax and the Martha's vocal and Sly. And we went in and recorded that at this warehouse studio somewhere, and David was there. He said, just play some funky sax on this. And I'm thinking, well, my God, here's Martha Davis and Sly Stone singing on it. I should come up with something. And I played it. He goes, that's just what I wanted. So that made me super happy.
Nice.
So David was on the scene. You can look him up. he was very deep into recording and production and songwriting and stuff. He must have known maybe Richie Zito. He might have worked with Moroder.
Yeah, I was going to say he probably had some connect to your producer.
Yeah.
And then the last track is Night by Night,
Mhm.
Martha solo.
Yeah, this was a Martha song about living your life by night. And this, so I think about it, that's what we did at that point. I remember, obviously I remember, I wouldn't be telling you this. I would drive to Conway Studio at rush hour on the Hollywood freeway when everybody else who had a quote normal job was bumper to bumper coming home from work, and I would be going to work at about 6 or 7 p.m. and we would work all night, and then I would leave in the morning and nobody would be driving in that direction. Everybody would be coming on the other side of the freeway going to work. So I really knew I had a different kind of job when everybody was going on the other side when I was going to work, and everybody was going the other side when I was coming back from work.
Well, it's probably cheap studio time. It's cheaper during the, in the overnights than it is during the daytime.
That's a good point, because they were used 24 hours a day, I think, if they were booked.
Yeah, and the daytime studios at Capitol, I remember they'd be like 3-hour sessions. Somebody'd come in and cut 2 tracks and they'd be out and the next one would be in, it just it was a machine. But at night was a whole different story. That's when the bands would come in and be able to work more on their songs and arrangements and so forth without the suits coming down and bothering them also.
It's a good point. I did put aluminum foil on my bedroom windows because I'd be going to sleep at 8 a.m. and then waking up in the afternoon. But as I'm looking at the lyrics, Stephen, on these songs, Hungry has a song word Tonight. Annie Told Me has In the Night. New York Times has a Skyscraper Nights. My Love Stops Here. Things are happening tonight. Cries and Whispers. The night reflects the time. Night by Night. Well,
yeah.
Night by Night. So night, you're looking for a theme, and I'm not, but I just noticed that there's a lot of night going on.
So what was the title? I mean, the album was titled Shock. There was a song called Shock, but was there any hidden meaning behind the title or use of the title for the album as Shock? I mean, were you shocked? Was the band shocked? What did the label think about it when they heard it the first time? Were they shocked? Did they like it? What?
I hate to say this, but I really don't know what shock meant, except it's the name of a song about being pursued or shocked by something. I mean, Martha could tell you all about it.
Yeah, okay.
But it didn't have a story like I told you about the album Careful. That was a line that I came up with, a song that me and Michael wrote that somebody said to me the word careful. So that had a story, and Little Robbers has a story because Martha wrote it and it's about it. All for One was just a clever way to have 4 people in the band being one. But Shock, I'm not sure. I wasn't as emotionally connected to this album as other ones. But they certainly promoted it and they loved the artwork. It got a lot of attention for that, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and the videos and the singles did well. It wasn't like a stiff or anything.
I think it sold 400,000 copies. So it wasn't a stiff, but the last 2, stiff is a relative term in the music business. If you
relative to the previous 2, yes, it was a stiff.
You have 2 gold albums and the next one doesn't make gold, then it's a stiff. Now, this is a side thing, and it might sound a little cruel, but it's not. Tom Petty and me had this ritual where when he put out a record, I'd come over and we'd listen to it when it just came out. And then when a Motels album came out, I would bring it over, and he was a very gracious guy. I mean, he was a true friend of mine. And I put on Shock, the album. He was listening to it, and it wasn't exactly his cup of tea. It's Tom Petty. Just, and we were us and he was them. And he was such a gracious guy. He listens to it and he goes, "Oh, that's nice sax." So it got to Cries and Whispers with that intro, with that vocal sample of a voice, and it's being played. And Petty, he just went over to this turntable because it was turntables, and he just lifted the needle up and he passed that entire track and went to the next track. And we listened to the rest of the record. I don't know why that stuck out. He didn't say anything. Just like, next.
Yeah, next.
But we would do that, and I'd go over there, and I remember there was a Slow Train Coming or one of these Dylan albums. He just thought Dylan, this is before he worked with Dylan.
Right.
I sat there with Petty, and he listened to side one. He did not say a word. And then he went and he flipped it over, and I'm just sitting there on the sofa. He didn't comment, and he listened to side two, and it ends with Every Grain of Sand, whatever album that is. I might not have the right record, but it was a Bob Dylan record. He was deep into just listening. These are things that stick with you.
He was in the zone.
Yeah, he was listening. He really listened. He was a great guy. But that's
well, speaking of Dylan, you had a Dylan encounter at some point during this year, didn't you?
The Dylan encounter.
You met Bob Dylan? And
yeah,
you wrote about it on your website.
Oh, I did. It was funny. Okay, so Bob Dylan went to see UB40 at the Palladium, and there's Bob Dylan. He was in his phase where he was showing up all over LA wearing an Eskimo parka. I guess to hide him, but he had this giant fur thing, and he's wearing it's LA, it's hot, and he's wearing this winter parka to be anonymous, and he's the only person wearing one probably in California. So I go up to Bob Dylan, and what do you say to Bob Dylan? So I said, "So do you like UB40?" Yeah. That was the end of my encounter. Very funny.
Like, wow, not.
Yeah, it was just like, what do you say to him? Of course, he likes UB40. He's at a UB40 concert.
So the album is done. What happens after that? Get ready to go out on the road again.
Yes. Well, what we did is we finished the album in August. It was released in August '85. And near the end of August, we went to Australia till September 2nd. We did our third tour there, played all over. And as I said, when you play all over Australia, there's about 6 main cities, and the interior, there's really nowhere to play. Then we came back and immediately did a US tour. We did the Shocked video September 26th. So, geez, I guess we got to that a month after the album was released, right? Because that was a follow-up to Shame. Shame was actually fully produced video and got a lot of play. I think Shock was like, hey, maybe we can get a single out of this too, but it didn't fly.
Well, there was, I think Shock was getting some bubbling airplay, and that led the label to think that it might be a good candidate for the second one, but
yeah, it was not to be.
It work out that way.
So we played 51 shows in 1985. That was pretty good for, a band that wasn't always touring for a year or so at a time, like huge acts would.
Right.
And we ended up playing, maybe you've got it on your screen there, but the last show we played as the Motels was the Hollywood Palladium, New Year's. Remember, we were partying our brains out after the show, and somebody stole the bass player's bass, and my spare sax I put underneath the banquet table is this beautiful spare saxophone. Never saw it again.
Oh.
And Kid Creole and the Coconuts were supposed to be on the bill, but they passed, so we played it ourselves. But that was the last show that lineup played.
At the Palladium. And how were the new songs received, by the original fans who were there for Total Control and Danger and, some of the earlier tracks? Was it the same fan group? Was it a different group of fans by this point?
It was the same fans. We played all the songs from the old times. We played many songs from Shock. I think we started with Shock when we started playing a set. Icy Red went over good. Shame. I remember all those keyboard parts because they had to be split between me and Scott. We were on opposite sides of the stage. But they accepted them. I don't think we didn't play every song off the record. There were maybe 5 off of the Shock record, but by then we had a bit of a track record of songs that we pretty much people wanted to hear and we wanted to play them. It wasn't rejected, but we really couldn't follow through with it. We played that, and then the band played that last show, and it's a different episode maybe, but then we tried to make the 6th Motels album, which never was a Motels album. It ended up morphing into Martha Davis' solo album called Policy, which was probably 87. We spent most of 86 trying to write the next record. In fact, it was exactly a year from when we started to work on the 6 Motels album, and exactly a year later, to the day, Martha dissolved the band. It was very strange. It was not planned, believe me. Nobody was thinking that way. But I looked at my diary, and we worked for a year from when we started it to when the band broke up.
So going back to the Palladium gig, when you guys played that, the last gig with that lineup, did you have any sense that this was the end of an era, if you will?
Absolutely not. That was the weird thing. I think that's why Bands Reunited came along, and it gave us a chance to have, I hate that word, closure. But we finished 1985 figuring we're making another record. In fact, we started in February. We just had a month off, and we started working on it for years. So it very gradually turned into a Martha album when she broke the band up. So we had no conception that was all we knew was the end of the year. There was no feeling at all like, wow, it's been a crazy year. We've been through this year and talking about it. Now we're going to take a break and work on another one. So it was just a gig. We played probably 3 New Year's in a row. It's great.
Yeah.
It's a great show to play New Year's.
Yeah.
The great thing for a band to play a New Year's show. It was just one of probably certainly 3 in a row.
Yeah, one of the classics that was the New Year's Eve show in Long Beach with X and Los Lobos. I mean, what a monster bill that was.
That was really funny to be headlining. Yeah, to be headlining with X and Los Lobos. There was this kind of faux rivalry between X and the Motels, but it didn't really exist. I think the critics were often pitting one against the other, which is comparing.
It was like an X-Scene versus Martha thing, which was contrived. It's like Beatles versus Stones, or
there weren't a lot of female singers, so that was an angle for sure. But there was there's the street cred versus the major label thing. Who knows what it was? But I went up and was talking to Billy Zoom during the sound check, saying, well, what kind of amp is that? He came up to me, he goes, oh, it's a so-and-so. And he goes, hey, you're just a normal person, right? And I go, yeah, I'm a musician. I mean,
yeah, aren't you?
Yeah, Billy Zoom, what a guitarist. And it makes me laugh because Los Lobos, after we broke up, they went on to be huge, and they were opening. I think they were opening.
84 and 85 was their breakout year. The movie came out then, their soundtrack came out then, and they've been rocking ever since.
Yeah, in 1983, I think their first EP came out of that album that had a few records. It's funny because a few weeks ago, I just sat in with Los Lobos like 4 nights in a row in Seattle, just playing saxophone. It was hugely thrill.
Nice.
I've done it before, but not that much. And me and Steve Berlin are old friends, but it was really amusing to have ex-Los Lobos and the Motels, 3 Los Angeles bands at the Long Beach Arena. That was a good show.
Definitely. Well, Marty, let's wrap it up there. And the next encounter, we'll talk a little bit about that reunion situation that happened several years ago for VH1. That should be fun.
Yeah.
Thanks again for sharing your stories and insight. And we'll talk to you next time.
You know it. A pleasure to do this. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.